and our Chief Financial Operations Officer, Phil Cross, to take us to the next step. I think this morning we're going to be starting with insurance.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome, Chuck. It's nice to see you again. Work with you again. Last night was really great. We were able to work through several of the responses to the Board of Ed questions. This morning, we are going to start with Phil and an opportunity for board members to ask questions around health insurance. And upon the conclusion of that, we will continue with our responses to questions submitted by the Board of Education. Again, after today's meeting, we intend to post all the responses that have been presented thus far to the Board of Education over the course of the last segment of budget meetings and workshops. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Cross.
Thank you, Erica. So this morning we're joined by Chuck. I'm not going to pronounce your last name, Chuck. I'm going to get it wrong. We're joined from Chuck from Brown & Brown, who's one of our health insurance consultant. Chuck is going to be guiding our discussions surrounding health insurance and just giving us a quick overview, and also will be here to answer questions. So with that, take it away, Chuck.
Right, Phil, thank you.
I'm sorry. I just want to interrupt. Just let us know if you'd rather have questions at the end of your presentation or interrupt you and make it different. So if you could just give us what you'd like.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions as we go. So if anybody's got anything along the way, shout out. I'm happy to just answer in the moment. That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
So as I would assume everyone on the call here knows, Weston Public Schools made a move last year to the state partnership plan. This was a return to the partnership plan after having been in there several years in the past. So we've been serving as broker for Weston since I think around 2020, give or take. And so when we came in, you guys were already in partnership, worked in our capacity as consultant in that role. As you were negotiating with all of your unions in the fall of 2022, heading into 23, we were looking for ways to save money on the budget, as always. And in the process of negotiations, agreed with all of the unions to exit the state partnership and return back to high deductible health plans. Once that move was agreed upon, then we did an RFP for all the carriers in the marketplace. So in the spring of 23, we had brought out the 3 finalists. They all presented their best and final numbers, and we ended up getting a very aggressive offer from Cigna. So the district moved to Cigna under high deductible health plans starting July 1st, 2023. As part of that arrangement, for the 23-24 year, we also had a not to exceed rate cap for 7/1/24. So we pretty much knew what our costs were going to be for 2 years, which is very difficult in this day and age in the health insurance space. So when we were midway through last year, it became apparent that staying with Cigna was going to be pretty difficult. Claims were exceeding premiums by quite a large margin, and Cigna was looking for an increase in the high 20s, low 30s range. I had a lot of conversations with Phil during that time. Obviously, that's not sustainable for a budget, and so we had a lot of back and forth and talked about the other options. At the end of the day, when your claims are running that poorly, we could do a bid, we could look at the market, but there's no magic bullet. Premiums need to go up to offset that. Re-enter the state partnership plan. The way the partnership plan works, it doesn't matter how good or bad your claims are running. They set their rates based on the county you're in, and that's the only factor. So when we compared the numbers last year, remaining with Cigna or any other traditional carrier, like I said, was going to be in the mid to high 20s, maybe after a RFP process that would drive down the cost a little bit, whereas moving to the state was effectively around closer to like a 20% increase for Weston. So that was the decision that was made. All the necessary meetings were had with unions to get them back on board. At the end of the day, people generally aren't ever going to be concerned about moving to the partnership plan from a benefit standpoint because it's a very rich plan design. It's a 1990s era copay plan. Everything is either a $15 or $0 copay, and it's a very rich plan for members. Probably 20% of the groups I represent here in the state are in the partnership plan because the dollars and cents made sense for them. In a lot of other places, with plan designs and how claims are running, we're able to keep costs below that threshold of the partnership plan. But it's always a good metric to compare to because it's always a worst case scenario for anybody of how's the partnership rates, because we could go there at any time because the way that the state statute is written that governs partnership, if any whole town or any whole board wants to enter, they have to take you regardless of how bad your claims experience may be. They're required by law to let you in. So we're here, we're in partnership, joined for 7/1/25.
Can I ask you a quick question, Chuck? Sorry. Yep. How long does our claims history stick with us?
So at any given time, right, if we were to market elsewhere, carriers are going to put the most weight on your most recent 12 months.
Okay.
They'll look back historically, but they really care what the last year looks like.
Okay. All right. So sorry, didn't want to keep going.
Nope. That's fine. So we're with the state since 7/1/25. In general, when you enter the state, you're essentially committing to 3 years. It's not a hard commitment. You would be allowed to leave after 1 year or after 2 years, but they impose exit penalties if you do. So by and large, once you enter the state, you're probably committing to at least 3 years. With the state, there's pros and cons, right? The pro is, hey, we were running poorly last year. That doesn't matter to us, right? We're going to get the rate however the state rate runs. So that's a pro. Con is you don't have as much control. When we're in a direct carrier relationship in a traditional arrangement, we get to dictate plan designs. We get to negotiate with our unions. We can negotiate with the carrier on renewals. There's a lot of more levers we can pull. With the state, it's take it or leave it, right? This is their plan design. This is their rate. You're kind of at their mercy. So reached out to Phil back in the fall because we had just gotten word on the state's initial projection for the coming year. So the state, one thing the state has improved since the first time Weston was with them is around timing of their renewals and more transparency. So the first time around that we were in the state here, state used to give estimates throughout the fall and early spring, but then they wouldn't lock in the rate till mid to late April, which obviously is too late for all the types of entities that are in the partnership plan. So they learned that lesson because in 22 is when they really had an issue. They had been advertising an expected increase of 8%. So all the groups were budgeting 8. And in many cases, groups even budgeted a little less than 8, knowing that historically the state would come in lower than they were saying. Fast forward to April 20th of that year, they release a 10.5% increase. Everybody's up in arms because that doesn't meet anybody's budget needs. So we actually had a mass exodus from the state that year. We had about 8 groups that left, not even counting Weston, in different ways and shapes. So now we're in the state. They're more transparent. So last November, they came out and said, there's some challenges we're facing financially. And as such, we're projecting to have our largest increase ever. And they gave the range of 12 to 15%. It's a big number on a big number, a big part of your budget, but it is warranted. And I got a couple of pieces of data here to show you where the state's coming from on this projection and why they're at where they're at.
While you're pulling that up, is this rate increase basically county by county, not county by county, but region by region, or district by district?
You're right. It's county by county.
Okay.
At the end of the day, the rates get set by county, right? So that's a change the state made around 5-6 years ago, when they first created this 2.0 version of their plan, which started in 2014. They just posted one rate on their website, right? Single two-person family, active retiree rates. No matter where you were in the state, everybody got the same rate. Very quickly, their overall makeup of the plan from an eligibility standpoint, they had about 75% of all bodies in the partnership plan from Fairfield County. The cost of goods and services in Fairfield County is higher than it is anywhere else in the state. So after a couple years of the state taking a beating from having so many Fairfield groups, that's when they enacted the county rate system. So now if you went on the partnership plan website and looked at all the rates, completely different rates for each of the 8 counties. Your Litchfield counties, your Windham counties are going to be a little bit lower. Your Fairfield County, your Middlesex County are going to be higher. That's just where doctors charge more for services. So what we're looking at here is the state plan's claims experience over the last 12 months. This is the most recent data available through September. The data through December will generally come out around March timeframe. So the simplest thing to look at here is the far right column, which is premium versus expense. So for every dollar the state collects in premium from all the partnership groups, how much are they paying out in claims and administrative charges? Over the last 12 months, that number's been 103%. So for every dollar they get, they pay out $1.03 in claims and fees. This is not the worst the state has ever been. They were at 108% a couple of years ago. Part of what allows the state to operate in this way, and again, this is something they've become more transparent about in recent years. Our company was actually one of the first that really started digging into the state's data and saying, hey, we look at what you're collecting in premium and we look at what you're paying out in claims and expenses, and you're operating at a loss. How is that working? Because that's not generally how businesses or insurance plans operate. And initially they were like, no, don't worry about it. You're reading the data wrong. And after several years of us pressing on them, they finally now come out and said, you know what? We're not obligated to operate in the black. The way the statute is written for the partnership plan, we ultimately take all the dollars from partnership, combine them with the dollars from the state employees health insurance fund, and as long as that's healthy, we're okay. So in practice, the state's been borrowing against state employee fund, which includes money from us, the taxpayers, to offset the partnership plan losses. Not great for taxpayers of Connecticut, pretty effective for groups in the partnership plan because you kind of get to take advantage of that below market rate. On a positive note, you can see the last 3 months have been better. This is since July when the state took an 11% increase. And again, that varied by county, but by and large, it was an average 11% increase last year. So you start collecting 11% more premium, and that's going to help your loss ratio. So hoping the state has turned the corner and things will improve. But pure performance and comparison to loss ratio is one aspect that's leading to the larger than normal increase in the state this year. The other is the money they have in the bank. Now, did you guys see, did you see the different report up here now? Okay.
Yes.
So this is taken from the fiscal year report that state released for their year ending June 30th, 25. And it's right on the state partnerships website. You guys can read through all the various interesting points about the plan if you want. But this box over here, fiscal year, year-end balance. In the past, you can see their balances. The first year after the plan went to the 2.0, they had about $300,000 in the bank, $8 million in the bank, $2 million. It get up into the $30 million in 21-22. That's largely because of COVID. COVID happened, people stopped going to the doctor, state was able to bank a bunch of money. That money kept at a large amount here because in 21, the state had additional COVID relief money, and they took $40 million and put it into the coffers of the partnership plan. They would have been at a negative here if not for the additional infusion of $40 million. After operating at a loss last year, they finished fiscal year 25 at negative $18 million. That is one of the major reasons why the state is looking at this big of an increase this year.
So,
Bad
so
loss
Chuck,
ratio for the last, and got to fill in this gap. Yes, Michael.
Chuck, just a quick question. First of all, glad you're here. You've answered already a ton of my questions, so the context was awesome. Thank you for that. When you're looking, so what's partly driving this, let's call it 12 to 15% range, right? This increase is, yes, it's partly sort of what's going on in terms of outlays versus premiums collected. And then the other part of this, of course, is that the fiscal sort of balance here that you're showing here, this table. And I guess the state needing to, for lack of a better phrase, refill the kitty here, right? And correct what's happened. In the past, and I don't know if you have this information readily available as I think through this. In the past, typically we've been given rates, and the initial rates and the ultimate rate has come in lower. Okay, somewhat. Do you anticipate that this year? Because at this point, I think this is one of the biggest risks, I think, to our budget. I'm sure we're not alone, right, in the state.
Yep.
It keeps me up at night, this sort of line item, not only for this year, but going forward. And so I guess I have two questions. The first is backward looking versus today. When you look backwards and you say, okay, over the past couple of years, the initial rate has been X and the actual rate has come in at Y. Okay. I assume that the Y has been lower for most of the time. I know that you mentioned like 2020 where it was actually higher.
Yep.
So point taken. Do you anticipate that will happen this year, or is that less likely because of the fiscal sort of stance of the state currently? And then secondly, sort of when you're looking at that in prior years, maybe diving into this a bit deeper, prior years in which the state has run a deficit here, have you noticed that it's actually less likely to come in lower, the actual rate to come in lower than the initial rate that's been given? So I guess let's start there.
Yeah. So I think one positive is I think the state really learned their lesson from that 2022 situation where they were telling 8 and it came out at 10.5, and then a bunch
right.
left, right? After that happened, I think they realized internally, all right, we've got to be more on point with the numbers we're giving. So I do think they're probably inclined to start a little bit higher, a little more conservative, and then finish. The other positive is they've improved their timing. So rather than April 20th, for the last 2 years, they've actually released their final rates the first week of March.
Yep.
Still a little challenging for the budget cycle of boards, but better than 6 weeks later than that. So the final answer to the question is, I don't know yet. We won't know for sure until the first week of March. We will have a better idea about 5 days from now, because next Tuesday, the state is having their next quarterly meeting where they're going to give an update on their projection. So we'll see if they're still at that 12 to 15 range come next Tuesday morning. My guess is they stay right about the same. We know they've got the $18 million gap they had to make up for. We know they were running behind the 8 ball on claims versus premium last year. And then the third factor that they've cited when they've been talking about everything over the last couple months is health insurance industry trend, which is something we've been speaking to our clients about for years and years and years.
This is my next question, Chuck.
Yeah,
Correct.
and the state for forever had been saying, "Oh, our trend is about 4 or 5%," and every year we would question that and say, "That's not the truth." Right? When we see any other claims data from all of the other carriers and all the other plans we deal with, it's 8-ish% on medical and 12-13% on pharmacy. That's what industry trend has been for many, many years now. On the last call that the state had in November, and they've closed all their calls over the last year or two now with, "Hey, here's a look at our claims. Here's an explanation." They have someone from the comptroller's office on there going through what we're seeing and what our trends are. And they said, "We've been looking at our claims and the medical trend is consistently at 8%. I'm like, "Yeah, that's what it is." So they've now come around to that, and they're actually including that number in their future projections rather than their fictional 4 or 5, which was leading to lower than market renewals, which was leading to them running at 103%. So for all of those reasons, I think the number they gave in November, they firmly believe is very close to the number they're going to settle at this year. So I don't think we're going to be in a situation where miraculously in March they come out and say, "Hey, great, we're at a 9."
Articulate that number again. You gave a range, but you referred to a number.
Yeah.
So you're referring to, because just to level set everyone who's going to watch this too. I mean, we have budgeted, and Phil, you can keep me honest here. We've budgeted 12.5% or so of an increase in our budget for this line item. The state is giving us a range of, as Chuck, I think you just mentioned, 12 to 15%. Our risk is the difference between, let's say, worst case scenario, 15% or 12.5, which is the 2.5%. So for this year, that's our risk. Going forward, of course, and this is, of course, unfortunate, and we're trying to do everything we can to mitigate this, but unfortunately, there is some crowding out that happens here in the budget by having a line item like this go up double digits every year, and us trying to ensure that the budget is somewhat fiscally responsible, right? While of course investing in the schools and making sure we have good student outcomes, etc. So it's very challenging going forward. And then I'll stop talking after this question. But so for this year, if you could be a little bit more specific on that 12 to 15%, do you anticipate 15%? And then my second part to this is going forward in terms of the trend. Again, I'm not going to hold you to this number, but it sounds like the numbers that we should be baking in or considering when we're running a multi-year, budgetary analysis, those are higher than what we had experienced in the past. What do you anticipate? Again, I'm not going to hold you to the numbers, but do you think this 12 to 15%, again, for the next couple of years, we're in the state plan now for a year, or we will be for a year. Do you think the next couple of years it will maintain around 12 to 15%? Do you think it will come down at all? I'm curious about your trend and how you are advising other municipalities, other school districts in terms of how to think about the rate of increase going forward.
Yep. As far as where I would peg you today for where you're going to end up for 7/1/26, it probably is closer to the 15, purely because you're in Fairfield County. And the state's going to put certain counties on higher end of the spectrum, and Fairfield's going to be on the highest end of that spectrum. So as we sit here today, state's probably thinking more like 15 for Fairfield. Again, next Tuesday we'll have a better idea. Maybe they shift that down a little bit. As far as future industry trend, I have no reason to believe anything's going to get better. There's always a tug of war. certain drugs go off patent and generics become available and there's money to be saved. Humira is one of the most expensive drugs out there. There is now a biosimilar that a lot of people are being moved to, and that's saving plans hundreds of thousands of dollars. But every day there's new drugs that come out in the market and treat diseases that if you had this disease 10 years ago, it was a death sentence. Now there's a drug you take and you are cured. But that drug costs $1 million or $2 million. And though not a ton of people are taking them, there's enough around the country that add up and drive up the cost of claims around the industry. So I'd say the 10, 11% as kind of a blend between the 8 medical and the 13, 14 pharmacy. I'd say 10, 11 is kind of what we need to anticipate going forward. Michael, you and I could probably talk at 2 a.m. because I also stay up at night worrying about this because I represent, 30 or 40 or 50 different towns and schools around the state. And everyone's getting crushed this year. I've got groups facing renewals in the 30s, 40s, right? I can't even count on one hand how many are plus 20, right? It's a brutal year. And I get it. So this is I'm presenting at a lot of meetings just like this because the industry is rough.
Last point for me, just for context for everyone that's on this call and everyone that will listen in. Last year we were presented with quite a large increase, as Chuck had mentioned at the beginning of the call, in if we had stayed with the high deductible health plan. And we had an escape hatch last year in terms of moving to the state partnership. There is no such escape hatch this year, as I understand it. And so my last question is just to Phil. Phil, can you just articulate for everyone on the call here, for people that may listen in, what the risk to the budget is here if the number actually came in at 15%, because this is going to have a material impact on what the budget will be this year and what the potential increase may be to the fiscal year 27 budget.
Sure. So as Chuck mentioned, we initially started out with a 12.5. Well, Chuck didn't mention this. We budgeted at 12.5%. After the first call, I was somewhat hopeful that the claims experience will trend downwards. In addition to that, any savings that the state was anticipating will take effect. If this actual final number should come in that 15% range, I think we're looking at an additional range between $200,000 to $300,000 for that spread.
Thanks, Phil.
I just have a question. You're quoting 12.5%. In a couple of our places, at least in the presentation, I think it was quoted at 13%. So again, I'm not sure how much of a difference there is, or if it was a rounding exercise, I'm not sure.
Okay.
But at this point, every 0.5% makes a difference. So,
Yeah.
and I understand that we're committed to the state plan. I understand the high cost of healthcare just because. And I understand run rates can be, or claim rates can be bad or more positive depending on the year. And what I'm sensing is there's no time where you could say, it's better to self-fund the group versus be on the state plan. Is that a moving target, or is it something that we should consider every, I know we're committed for 3 years. We're also in a contract. But what's the thinking behind self-funding versus going to the state plan? And are we hampered by being a relatively small pool?
Yep, you're hitting all of the exact correct points there, Deborah. So we have lots of groups that are self-funded. We've actually got, in this particularly challenging renewal year, we've got a couple of groups in Fairfield County particularly who are looking at pretty sizable increases, who we're trying to help make that switch from fully insured to self-funded. Because when you're a self-funded plan versus fully insured, just on average year over year, you're going to be about 7 or 8% less expensive. So it's definitely the right move for a lot of groups long term. What you just said about size is exactly right. You guys have about 350 on the plan. So you are big enough to be self-funded, but you're on the lower end of that, right? 300 is kind of the cutoff. Anything below that, by and large, don't promote self-funding because there's too much volatility from year to year. When you guys get to around your size, it is an option. You would need to do exactly what you did in 22, move away from the state plan, negotiate different plan designs, get into that arrangement. And rather than doing that on a fully insured platform where you're paying the carrier extra dollars in the form of fat and margin because they're the ones bearing the risk, so they charge you more for that. You're the ones paying your own claims. You cut out all that margin. In exchange for cutting out that margin, you're bearing the risk, right? You could have a year where claims run really bad, and now we're $1 million over what we thought our spend was going to be for the year. Conversely, you're going to have good years where instead of writing that check to the carrier and they're keeping all the extra dollars, you keep those extra dollars locally. I do think that is a concept that should be explored. Call it, a year and a half, 2 years from now when we're at the point of potentially being able to leave the state.
Phil, have we ever been self-insured in the past?
Yeah, we were self-insured, I think, prior to 2019.
Okay. And we moved away from that because?
I think in the 2019 renewal, the stopgap insurance came in significantly higher because we were trending high claims. So at that point, because of the stopgap, the stop loss insurance was so high, the decision was made then to go to the state partnership plan.
And can you describe what the stop loss insurance, how that works?
I'm going to fumble with it somewhat, so I'm going to ask Chuck to help me with this one.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So stop loss insurance is limits you put to protect that risk, right? So fully insured, you have zero risk. You've agreed to a rate with a carrier. You pay them that rate every month. They pay all your claims. Whether you run spectacularly good or spectacularly bad, you have no risk. You know going into the year what your cost is. Self-funded, you're paying your own claims. There could be good years, there could be bad years. Like I mentioned before, there are $1 million drugs now. There are people who develop hemophilia, and they're going to be an ongoing $1.5 million claimant for the next several years. You can't sustain that kind of volatility. So groups that are, under 5,000 lives or so, anybody who's on the smaller end of the spectrum of being self-funded buys stop loss insurance. There's two different types of stop loss insurance. One is individual stop loss. Every group, again, that's under thousands of lives, every group that's got self-funding is going to have individual stop loss insurance because that caps your liability on each individual person on your plan. For a group your size, we'd probably be looking at $150,000 or $175,000 as your threshold. So if it was $150,000, for every single person on your plan, you're on the hook from $0 to $150,000. Then your liability stops and you're protected. So if they're $1 million claimant, you pay $150,000, insurance carrier picks up the other $850,000.
Just for that individual.
For each individual on the plan, right? And
Okay.
for a group your size over the course of a year, you'd probably see 5 or 6 such people. You're going to have years where you might only have 2 or 3. You're going to have years where you have 8 or 9. But in any given year, that's probably about what we're looking at.
Okay.
The other type of stop loss is aggregate stop loss insurance. That's what you buy on the plan as a whole. So if we said, hey, our claims liability for the year is $10 million, we buy aggregate stop loss of 120% is common. That would say, all right, we're expecting 10 million. The max we could pay is 12 million.
Mm-hmm.
If we just had the worst year ever, once in 100-year pandemic, and we had 15 million in claims, we're done at 12. That cost is cheap in the grand scheme of things. That's like $8-9 a head per month. Whereas your individual stop loss, you're paying, depending on how your group's running, $200, $250 per person per month for that coverage. So
Okay.
relatively, the aggregate is dirt cheap because almost no one ever hits it. It's hard if underwriters have enough claim data on a group that's large enough. It's hard for them to miss by 20%.
Right.
So maybe once out of every 20 years, somebody will hit an aggregate stop loss number. Whereas individual stop loss, like I said, you're going to have 6, 7 people hit it every year. So if you do self-funding, you have to have individual. The aggregate, about half the groups I have it, half don't.
So they have it in addition to individual, or they have it in
Yes.
place?
Oh, yeah. You have to have individual. You would
Okay.
never want to have a self-funded plan without that protection. The
Okay.
aggregate, like I said, is how comfortable you are.
Okay.
Can I ask?
And I don't mean to get bogged down in the different types of plans because we are where we are this year. But I am trying to get at Michael's point, like what's the new normal? And so plan design would become, important, and we have some time to think about it and all of that. So I didn't mean to take us down the hypothetical road, but I'm just trying to figure out, rather than avoiding Michael, trying to avoid, if the state plan continues to go south, rates are ridiculous. We don't particularly want to live in that world. And so we need to think about what perhaps other structures would be. And that's as far as I meant to take it. So sorry about that.
But it sounds as if, and I mean, I agree with Michael's point, and Deb, you too, but it sounds as if right now, the budget that we have in front of us is not accurate because it doesn't reflect the 15% increase right now. So it sounds as if we need to actually maybe revise the budget that we're working on to reflect 15%.
Well, just remember also, though, 15 is rate to rate, year to year. It's not totally reflective of what your bottom line spend is. I believe, based on timing, all of your union contracts are up again this year to be renegotiated for 7/1. Is that?
That happened last year, Chuck.
So, okay. Oh, I don't have new contracts then.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So if you have any cost share changes negotiated in there, I don't know if between this year's rates that are agreed upon to next year's cost share, that, even if your rate goes up 15, but if you have the employees picking up a half point more in cost share or something along those lines, your budget rate increase wouldn't be the full 15. Employees would be bearing some of that.
Okay. Since I wasn't a part of the negotiation committee, I'm not sure exactly where we came out on that. Do we have anything like that in the contracts?
We do. We do have we have a 1% increase for WA, and I think we have a 0.5% for the WTA. We will be starting negotiation with ASME in early spring.
Okay. That'll help offset then.
Yeah, and that's, a half doesn't mean half to the whole. Like a half is a half point going from 18 to 18 and a half, which is a bigger chunk. So you shouldn't, even if the state comes out at 15, you shouldn't realize 15 increase to your bottom line because employees are going to eat up more of that.
But great question, Sharon, and one that we have to address. It gets at Michael's question about how much risk is in this budget. And we'll have that discussion along with, a larger discussion. Okay, are there, Chuck, did you want to follow up with anything that you wanted to say but haven't had a chance that we should know?
No, I think I touched on pretty much everything. Like I said, the next step is we see what the state comes out with for their update next Tuesday. I'll be in touch with Phil shortly thereafter that. And then that'll be the last word we get from them until first week of March when they set the final number.
Okay, well, it's good that at least another call is coming up and maybe we'll get a little bit more crystal ball.
I mean, if I'm glass half
focused.
full,
Yeah.
like I said, those last 3 months on the claim report have a better loss ratio than the previous one. So finger crossed, maybe they shave a point off next week. We'll see.
Okay, all right, good. Are there other questions from board members about insurance? It is I don't know, what is it, 45% or so of our increase year over year total budget. So yeah, so it's really important that this is a place to try to understand and see how much control or lack of control we have and what our parameters that we're working within. Okay, are there any other questions? All right, this is incredibly important topic and information. And Chuck, thank you for being our consultant and being Phil's new best friend. So thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
You're welcome. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Okay, I'll turn it back to Superintendent Forty. Where do we go next?
Thank you. We are headed right back into our responses to board member questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Tina, who's going to resume where she left off last night.
Great. Good morning, everyone. It's like we never left. So I'm going to just continue and refer back to where we ended last night, which was around testing. Julie we have a couple slides that we just put together so we could transfer some of the visual charts that we were talking about. We landed yesterday talking about purchase services under the testing and evaluation section, which is on page 163 of the budget book. We talked a little bit about licensing and what that structure looks like when we are looking at the different types of assessments that are testing and assessments that are supported in our general ed and special education areas here. I just wanted to finalize the question regarding testing time and the amount of time that we schedule the assessments throughout the year, and whether or not the value of the instructional assessments and the data is worth implementing. So Deb asked that question, and so I just want to finish that up. Julie, if you go to the next slide, that's where we're looking. So I just wanted to clarify again for those of you that weren't with us last night. In the curriculum and instruction line, these individual assessments that are outlined are really different types of assessments that we use for various screening purposes. So for example, NWA is our screening assessment that we implement 3 times a year across the district, kindergarten through specific courses at the high school, specifically Algebra 1 and English 9. And it's also the data that we use when we are determining students that are in need of intervention support through our MTSS system and structure. Another assessment within here is the literacy assessment, which is the DIBELS 8 assessment. That one I mentioned last night is a mandated assessment for universal screening for reading in grades K through 3. Results in probably a little bit of that increase from 23-24 to 24-25, because we did not use that assessment in all those grades back then. We do use that now. It is mandated that we use that assessment in kindergarten through 3rd grade. And then some of the other assessments that are listed here, the OLSAT, the Naglieri, those are universal screening that we use for grades 2 and 5 when we're identifying students within our gifted and talented program that we are required to identify, even though we're not required to provide a service, but we do in Weston in grades 3 through 8. And then finally, the biliteracy assessment refers to the Lost Links assessment, which is what we use for our screening tool to determine students that are identified for multilingual learners and the programming that they may need. So Deb, you asked the question specifically about the value of these assessments and whether or not we feel that the schedule that we create, that we use these assessments for, is valuable and it's worth our the instructional time lost in order to implement them. So it's a great question, and we ask this question of ourselves every year. It's what we call weeding the garden, right? We want to make sure that we're not testing just to test. We want to make sure that the quality of assessments are standardized, of direct correlation with our standards, and the data that we're getting is giving us information to make really sound instructional decisions. So every year, and sometimes multiple times within a year, we assess the schedule, we assess the value of the testing time to ensure that we are gathering adequate information that directly supports our structures like MTSS, multi-tiered system of support. We'll talk a little bit more about that next. And also, while balancing some of the mandates when it comes to needing a reading universal screener that is mandated for us to implement K through 3 times a year, while also making sure that if we can make adjustments to our testing schedule or the implementation of certain assessments and balance the information that we want to gather to look at growth over time, it is worth adjusting where we can. So for example, we used to test all students in grade 9 when I first started here 3 times a year in math and reading. We have since shifted away from that model and are only testing students in specific courses, Algebra 1 and English 9 at the high school. We have found that because when students get to the high school, it's not by grade any longer, it's about their schedules are determined based on the courses that they take. So in order to use that data more intentionally, more specifically within our certain classes and relying on the standards that the data is giving us, that is a shift that we've made since I started. Budgetary reasons, I will tell you that the platform and the way that the licensing with the companies go, they don't care how many times you administer the assessments, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 times a year. There are guidelines, but from a financial or budgetary standpoint, when you purchase a license, how you use that license is the district's discretion. So it will not help us reduce any funding other than reducing the number of licenses that we purchase. So just want to give some context and color to the way in which that we budget. These are all based on the number of students that we need to administer an assessment to within their K through 9 or K through algebra or English trajectory. Questions on that question? Okay. I can't see everybody, so I guess that's a good time to move on to the next question. Yes? Yes, good. Okay, so the next question came, there's a series of questions that Deb, Sharon, and Nicole asked about staffing as it relates to, in quotes, academic support. And if we could describe the impact or the outcomes that we in Weston are utilizing the individual roles that we identify in math and ELA around academic support. What does the data show? How do we make determinations on the need for staffing? What do those roles mean? How do they support general education for students? And how does that weave or interact with special education roles such as paraeducators? Within this portion of the conversation, there was a question from Nicole that also talked about structured study. And so I will be able to answer that here and kind of elaborate a little bit on the change in the model in which Tracy mentioned last night, a little bit about how we are redeploying some of the support structures away from the way in which we've identified structured study within one to support the structured study component of social emotional learning that supports MTSS in our district and how we've shifted away or how we are proposing to shift away for next year. So that leads us to the next section, which is on academic support. So it's important that we pause here and really understand when we talk about academic support roles that are held by general education, they are roles that are woven within our multi-tiered system of support, right? And multi-tiered system of support, I would also add that this is probably another characteristic or quality I might describe. Our framework around MTSS is multi-layered, right? So the framework or the structure of a multi-tiered system of support is always geared to strengthen tier 1 instruction, right? So there's tier 1, which is hopefully more than 80% of our population. And then we go to tier 2, which is 10 to 15% of our population, and tier 3, which is 1 to 3% of our population. So as you can visualize, those tiers get smaller as they go up in a triangle or a pyramid way. So tier 1 instruction and the delivery of tier 2 and tier 3 interventions in literacy and math, we utilize those common assessments and the common screening assessments that I talked about previously to help us identify who needs additional support in our framework, right? When students receive intervention in math, literacy, and social emotional learning, those are determined based on our screening assessments. And then once they receive intervention, they start receiving more accelerated or customized intervention programs based on their goals that are aligned to standards and based on their specific needs. So there's a lot of additional assessments, there's additional curriculum resources, there's an additional structure around data decision-making and data analysis. And that is all woven within our district's multi-tiered system of support model or framework. I want to make sure that we're clear that MTSS is a structure, it's a system on how we are responding to the needs of the students based on the resources, whether that be staffing, whether that be curriculum resources that we have in order to meet the needs of the students. So instruction, intervention, data, and social emotional learning integration really is a framework that looks at the whole child and really determines the level of the whole child's success as they move from kindergarten all the way to high school. So it's a holistic framework. It is required that every district has a framework and that we have a system in place that provides supports to students that's in a proactive and a systematic way. The components of an MTSS framework and a system, as I mentioned before, it's not just academic. I want to make sure we're clear that it includes reading, math, and social, emotional, and behavioral support. So we look at academic, we look at attendance data. It relates to that indicator from our next generation accountability system around chronic absenteeism. We look at tardies. So there's a whole additional layer beyond the academic support piece. So in Weston, since I arrived here, our MTSS framework has been enhanced. We've improved upon it since I started over the past 4 or 5 years. And we've really ensured that our systems and structures support all learners in a very proactive, preventative, and a strengths-based framework. And we want to make sure that it connects very deeply to the general education core, the core curriculum, and the instructional lessons that all of our staff support in the classrooms, not only for reading and math, but also our social emotional lessons that our social workers, our counselors support the curriculum in that way as well. So we look at evidence-based interventions and we look at data to help us move within that system of support throughout the year and on a regular basis, right? And a lot of this, as you'll see, is very individualized because we're a small district. So the needs of these students that are needing additional intervention are always very goal-oriented, goal-driven, based on what explicitly they need and how we can respond to those needs. So the staffing roles within the MTSS academic support framework, as Deb and Sharon and Nicole asked about, are primarily general education because they serve students based on need, demonstrated through data and not eligibility status. So it's important to know that this system is a support system. It's not a label. It's fluid. Students can move in and out of different tiers throughout the course of a year. And if they need to remain in intervention for more than a year, that's okay too. The variance comes with intensity, and sometimes depending on the goals, they may shift interventions throughout the year as well.
Hey,
MT
Tina, sorry,
yes,
just a quick question. Sorry to
yep,
interrupt you. I apologize.
yeah, go ahead.
Just because it's so personalized and individualized, this sort of framework and what you're trying to do here. And look, I support it, obviously. Do you have, and because data is a vital part of this, do you have data in terms of, as you're judging the success of this sort of framework? Do you have data? And I asked this question, I've asked this a couple times in the past, so forgive me, but because you have data and it's individualized and you can follow students from year to year, right? Um, how do you judge success? Let's say, do you judge success of this program, this approach, by the number of students who had started an intervention and then sort of exited intervention, no longer needed it? And then how do you judge the success on the social, emotional, and behavioral support? So those are my two questions there.
Yeah, great questions. That is part of Deb's and Sharon's question regarding like the metric that we're using to show that our interventionists, for example, are making an impact. So I do have a slide. I just want to make sure that everybody understands the different roles and the staffing in order to support a robust and comprehensive MTSS framework before I go into the chart. So I just want to, before I answer your question and Deb's question and Sharon's questions a little more specifically, I just want to be very clear that as we think about the different roles that support an MTSS framework, we have interventionists, you'll see that in the budget. We also, because they support the academic component, the reading and the math, we also know that because I outlined that social emotional learning and behavior is part of this, there are some overlaps between special education or pupil personnel departments and those that we deploy for support on the MTSS side. So the social workers, our psychologists and counselors, and even if you were with us with the board last year, even our curriculum and instruction leaders support our staffing positions that support this robust MTSS framework because they support tier 1, right? So I just want to be clear, MTSS is a framework and we have various roles that to support this structure and this system in order to see the return on investment or the impact on student outcomes that Michael, you're asking about specifically. So last night, you can actually put up the next slide if you want, Julie, just to talk about the different positions that I'm talking about here within the MTSS framework. So last night we talked about also how structured study is going to be woven into the MTSS framework at the high school. It's designed to provide targeted short-term support for students that need help with executive functioning, such as specific executive functioning skills, organization, time management, task initiation, cognitive flexibility. And the model for next year that we're proposing is that, as Tracy mentioned, that the individual position that we have right now that supports structured study curriculum will be woven into what the counseling department can support for next year. This year, structured study serves 38 students within semester 1 and 34 students in semester 2 across an 8-day rotation. These numbers reflect a point in time and not a fixed caseload. I want to remind everyone that MTSS, while we'd like to have like exact numbers all the time, it is fluid, right? Every time that we implement a universal screener like NWEA, we could have students, we could see students moving in and out of different tiers of support, for example, for math and reading. So the chart that I'm showing you now reflects the staffing component of the academic side of the MTSS kind of framework in reading and math specifically. And we used to have, as I just mentioned, an individual staffing position that was for the structured study at the high school. We have dissolved that position and rolled the support through the counseling department at the high school within an 8-day rotation to support the fluidity of those students that are needing support for structured study. So that is a reduction overall. I know, Deb, you mentioned you had a number of a 10.8, I think it was, or 10.3. This is the outline of the individual staffing roles within our MTSS framework for math and reading. And then at the high school specifically, as I described, we do have a point. This is what Peter asked about last night. We do have a 0.5 MTSS support specialist that helps with the overseeing the management of the reading lab, the literacy lab, the math lab, and those students that are currently in structured support, and organize and coordinates the data teams, help support the implementation of testing. She also has met individually one-on-one with students if there's some questions regarding attendance, and help support deploy some of our resources for individual needs. So that is the goal and the purpose of that support specialist at the high school level. Again, that individual position, the person right now, supports the MTSS system and structure in implementing a robust and coherent system at the high school, and also teaches science half-time as well. So moving into the data component, I did also look at the effectiveness of our program, look at the number of students that we serve within the MTSS framework, and that's the second chart. If you want to flip to the next one, Julie. So this chart represents a district-wide snapshot from the fall of this year. Okay, so, and these are just a snapshot of the percentage of students after the universal screening that we completed on NWA in reading and math. And it shows how students are currently accessing the MTSS supports that we've structured in the district. It also looks at the students that may be monitored in the classroom in small groups, whether that be social emotional learning or MLL, language support. It may also be small group support in reading or math in the Tier 1 classroom. That's what monitoring means. And it also means that you've got students that doesn't reflect necessarily the students that may already be in the system and receiving intervention. So this is just a snapshot to say literacy across K through 5, we have 22% of our population that's currently receiving intervention through our literacy interventionist or through our literacy lab. K through 5, 22%, and 26% at the secondary level. And in math, 11%, it's a little less, K through 5, and 23% of the population, 6 through 12. Social emotional learning is a little more challenging to quantify, and a lot of that is lessons that are being delivered through either counseling or social workers versus being, having small group instruction based on the executive functioning of the social emotional behavior in the classrooms. We are looking to improve on that aspect of our MTSS system. How are we gathering the data around social emotional and behavioral small groups across the district? And then, yep,
Hey, Tina, I have to jump in a sec, but so on this slide here with showing you sort of the population that's being served. I mean, that population, this is a snapshot, right, that you can provide every year, and that population changes,
yes,
right?
sir.
So the population
fluid.
changes. What I would and this is maybe, and maybe you guys do this, and maybe this is asking too much, but what I envision is, you're tracking a student from first grade to 12th, and there's, again, we could do this a number of ways, but there's a line graph, and it's like, okay, this is sort of what's happening in terms of student performance. This is when they had intervention. Oops, they're out of intervention now. Oh, they're back in intervention. And so you're tracking progress and you're connecting it to, in some way, I know this is imperfect and I haven't really thought about it, but you're tracking in some way to how impactful or successful, let's say, this framework is for the students as they go through the school system. Is that sort of,
Yes.
are you doing that with students below the surface here?
Yes. So if you go to the
Okay.
next slide, I'll jump ahead. So it is hard, Michael, to your point, right? Because
Yeah.
intervention is a service, and the goal is to be proactive so that students don't need intervention. Everything they should get is in the classroom, right?
Right.
High quality intervention is provided through differentiation support, some scaffolding. That is why the curriculum and instruction leaders really help elevate the practice and the curriculum and the implementation of that curriculum in the tier 1 core instructional block, right? So if a student needs more intensive support, let's just stick with math and reading, for example. How do we determine, or how do we track that, is your question. So if you look at this chart, this is a snapshot from last year. Our universal screening assessment is NWA for math and reading. It is our indicator, not our only indicator, but is one of our strongest indicator in determining needs for students in tier 2 and tier 3, more intensive support for math and reading. If a student is below that really thick line that I put there, that is how we determine if we need to respond. What does the student need specifically? Unpacking that is a lot harder than just on a chart here, okay? So I won't go into the nitty-gritty of that. But the goal is, let's say, in the fall, if you look, we have about 13% of our population in grades kindergarten through 9 last year that needed more intensive support in math. That's the top block. The goal over time is to move the 13% and reduce that number. That is the ultimate goal. Move that percentage over that thick line threshold, right? So if you look from fall to spring, in math last year, did we do that? We did. We had 3% in the fall in that 20th percentile or below, and we moved them, without getting into the nitty-gritty of who those kids are and what the goals are and how we did it, through progress monitoring and through the intervention supports, it went down. So ultimately, this is how we track and look at our own. It's also how we determine the number of staffing that we need to support those students and the percentage of students that we need to support. You can see that we need more support in reading because we need to reading is a little different, right? Reading has many layers attached to it. And although we have a small percentage of students below the 40th percentile, their needs vary more greatly and more intensely. So you will see this is how we look at our fall to spring kind of growth when it comes to our metric around intervention and support. We want students that are below the 40th percentile throughout the year to reduce from the fall to the spring. That's the ultimate goal. Or we want kids to move across the bands. Yes,
Yeah.
somebody.
Me. I'm sorry, Tina, if you don't mind. Michael, I think your question really points at, listen, our budget includes these support people. Are we looking at data to determine that their work is yielding results? And you're referencing what's called progress monitoring, and we do that in various levels. Tina is showing you at a very high district level how we progress monitor to make sure that the interventions we're providing to our students is working, and we are moving kids in their growth and development in reading and math. There is other levels of progress monitoring. You referenced one where we look at a kid's trajectory from kindergarten to 12th grade, right? Individualized. Then there's also day-to-day and weekly progress monitoring. So if a child's working on, let's just say, first sound fluency in first grade, that we're monitoring and tracking their progress over time on that skill every 2 weeks. So there are multiple levels of progress monitoring happen at the district, the school, and the individual student level to ensure that the value we place in this budget on the people who provide these interventions are yielding the outcomes for kids that we need.
No, and that's great. And I didn't mean to suggest that you guys weren't doing that. I was just, again, it's a consistent curiosity of mine, Tina, in terms of how we're doing this. And I'll take it a step further, and then I'll turn off my mic, which is to say that when you overlay that then and you say, okay, this is the effectiveness sort of of the MTSS framework, we can also then say, okay, if the effectiveness is, let's say, stalling, going down, or improving, are we adequately staffed given the population to continue to be as effective as possible? And so that's sort of the next layer of analysis I think that we're talking about here as well is, yes, okay, it's effective today. And as we track progress here over the years, that effectiveness may sort of fluctuate. And then we have to look at whether or not we're, are we overstaffed? Are we understaffed? And so that's sort of what the pieces I'm trying to put together over a longer term, but this is helpful and thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Erica, for helping clarify also. I think the multi-layered component of this work is very nuanced, and every year, Michael, we reevaluate and revisit because the students change over time and our numbers change. And we look at scheduling, we look at the individual goals that students are in need of receiving support and intervention when we determine the number of staffing in order to support those groups of students. I think that's always a conversation and an analysis that we do over the course of the year. And it's also why it's so important. This is why I put this question after the testing one, because it's also important why we have quality assessments and helping us make those decisions, and the data that we're gathering when we're analyzing that information. Are we getting enough information to adequately determine how we're going to respond to the needs of the students that are in front of us at that point in time in that given year?
Tina, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
The percentages, say below the 20th percentile or the 21 to 40%, or any of them, do those include special education students or not?
So they do. In this case, they do. Because this is a district snapshot for all students across the district. And in some cases, when we think about an MTSS structure specifically, we know that holistic approach includes the social, emotional, and the behavior component. So we are looking at all students when we're looking at the improvements and the way that we're deploying our staff throughout the year. We can break it up further. And that's usually what we do when we look at our district snapshot in our fall, winter, and spring kind of report out to the board when we break it up by subgroup. And we look at achievement.
Okay, so just one final question. I'm sorry.
Sure.
This is probably too much in the weeds, but if I were a student identified for special education services, I qualify there. Where would I receive, and one of my difficulties ends up being demonstrated in math, low performance. What support do I get? Is it the math interventionist, or does it happen within the special education department, or both?
Those goals are identified within the student's IEP and are part of a special education caseload. So the special education department supports the students that have specific IEPs and the goals that they're set forth in their plan. We model a very similar approach with intervention with our interventionists as well. As Erica mentioned, the data helps us determine the goals that the student needs, and then we create a schedule based on how much support we determine that student needs, and then our interventionists create a schedule of support outside the classroom and the number of times that we can see and respond with our intervention curriculum that we provide for individual students that are not identified in special education. Does that answer the question? Yes. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. That makes sense now, and you've answered my question. Excellent. Then I have a follow-on question. It's actually a little bit about where Mike was going, but it's on science. Why don't we do this using the NGSS scores? Because you do the NWA for math and reading for science, but I know you only really have 2 grades to really look at intervention, 5th and 8th. But it seems like you could also create a use of MTSS for intervention in science, right? So that'd be kind of, I don't want to keep hiring people, but it seems like if this is a functional and productive exercise, why don't we do the same thing for science, right? You don't necessarily have to use a science teacher in high school to run it, but maybe they could. I mean, it's 2 grades leading to 5th and 8th grade, but it'd be kind of it would sort of complete the program, right? Because we do have a metric that test scores. And you did a great presentation earlier on how we do it at NGSS. And there's always, room for improvement, right? And if you've got a big, bold vertical line in the middle, maybe you need to see why some younger learners, 5th graders, or a little older middle schoolers are struggling a little bit with science. Maybe it's also an MTSS.
I'll respond to that question in a layered approach. So I love that idea. And while logistically, here's how that would go if we wanted to include science support within this structure. It would mean that in order to add a layer of MTSS that included science, we would need to add a universal screener. So we would need to add another assessment to identify those students to be proactive, because using the NGSS is not enough. We would need to identify intervention programs that align to specific goals, which I can tell you, full disclosure, even math is an area that struggles with identifying quality intervention programs. I've never seen, in my experience so far, I've never seen an intervention program for science. And the way that the MTSS is structured, it's focused on reading and math, and here's why. Because there is a direct correlation between performance in reading with science. So if we can focus on the reading aspect for individual students and what their needs are, it typically, actually, it's almost a direct one-on-one correlation. It returns and reflects in their science scores. And I would also add and put a plug in for our curriculum and instruction leaders, which is the next question, which is why the tier 1 support of MTSS and our curriculum and instruction leaders are so critical to the role of tier 1 classroom instruction support and helping build their capacity and ensuring that our curriculum is evidence-based, research-based, and is of high quality.
Excellent. You actually answered Michael Guido's question, where a metric, where I would make the case that capability in math also would reflect in science too, but that's just me, the engineer. You have a metric. If you do well in your MTSS for the early learners in math and reading, it may reflect a little better capture of more competency in science. Mm-hmm. But I mean, you have it built in, but it doesn't perfectly solve that problem, right? So it's sort of like all it does is maybe shift your little bold vertical line a little bit to the left if it was science, right? So it's kind of a nice combination. You do math and reading, you have these resources, then you follow it on, and maybe there's a little latency of a year or two, right, with how you doing in science. But
yeah, and I would add, as you know, we in science, specifically around NGSS, we have a goal in our district improvement plan and our school plans, where even though science is not explicitly within our MTSS system or structure for intervention support, we do have instructional software that we have been piloting and have adopted since last year called Inner Orbit, because there are different standards related to science specifically, even though it overlaps with reading. That is an instructional software platform that we adopted 3 years ago, which helps us simulate similar aspects of MTSS, which is progress monitoring, looking at formative assessment tools. And we use it also to kind of do our own, almost like our own internal universal screener. But it's through the curriculum, it's through classroom instruction, it's not separate. Hope that answers your question, Peter. Okay, any other questions on this one? Because that is kind of, I hope I did a thorough job on the academic support MTSS, the roles within that before we move into the CIL question that Deb asked, which I think ties nicely into this conversation around tier 1 support and the allocation of staffing for our curriculum and instruction leaders, which also ties into MTSS and how do we support curriculum, how do we support our teachers, and how do we support our students throughout the district.
Yeah, would you mind just going back to the previous slide?
Sure.
And I appreciate these visuals, so thank you.
Hmm.
Okay, so I'm curious, multilingual learner MTSS support area. What does that mean?
Right, so if we complete, our last links assessment is our screener to identify students in that are in need of multilingual support, right? Linguistic acquisition, if they've entered into the district. So we have staff that support students in small groups throughout their K-12 trajectory so that they can build their English language acquisition so that they can access the general education curriculum more easily.
Is that different from an L teacher?
No, it's the same. So English language learner, the state has now changed that to multilingual learner. It's one and the same. I'm sorry.
Right, but they require a teacher to teach them how to speak English. Is that different from this MTS?
No. No, it's part of it. So the MLL teacher, the EL teacher is the individual who supports those students in small groups in our district.
Okay, so okay. So those people, so this row of multilingual learner, they're not necessarily being supported by in our budget. They're not being supported by the school-wide support staff specifically. They actually are being supported by their separate L teacher or multilingual learner teacher who's teaching them how to learn English.
It depends. It's not an easy black or white answer because you can have students based on not only the assessment that we've determined that they're MLL, but if there's a classroom teacher who sees that they need math support, it's not just English.
Right. They
we may
would fall within a different row. But this
yes, correct.
multilingual learner row is not on the load of these special or school-wide support teachers within this row. Like if they're being supported by a school-wide support teacher, they're going to fall within a different row of this chart.
They could fall within two.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
And then monitoring only, what does that mean? Because you're saying within the tier 1 classroom, does that mean classroom observation?
So we'll get into this a little bit with the curriculum and instruction leaders.
Okay.
But if a student, it was in MTSS or in intervention, and we're looking to gradually move them out and move them back into the classroom without additional intensive support, we have groups of students that an interventionist and or a curriculum and instruction leader could provide monitoring support in small group in the classroom to ensure that they remain in that classroom and not come back to intervention. So it's part of the system to ensure that before we release them, without having that additional oversight, management support, and small group instruction, that we do so without completely just all hands off.
Right. Okay.
That's what that is.
Okay. And I know it might differ from student to student, but
Yep.
like generally how frequently is a professional monitoring these students?
Oh, so it depends on the tier, right? If it's tier 2, it's bi-weekly. If it's tier 3, it's weekly. And if it's in the classroom, depending on the unit and the lesson that they're on and the activities that they're on, they're regularly gathering data in the classroom through, it could be curriculum-based assessments, it could be an exit ticket at the end of the lesson. So we have data that's embedded within our curriculum that on a daily basis, we're looking at all students at that point and whether or not they've mastered the standards from that lesson. before, in order to help build those small groups on a daily basis. Does that answer the question?
Sort of. I think what I'm really trying to understand is I
Mhm.
understand multi-tiered support services. I always support them. But I'm just really trying to understand, like, what does each school-wide support specialist educator do in the district and with each school? And like, what is their caseload? How frequently are they seeing these students that you have on this chart?
Okay.
Is it
Yeah.
push in? Is it pull out? Is it in group? Like really, like what
Yep.
their
So
schedule kind of looking at like? And I think also it might be, this is a helpful chart to understand who is being served in one semester, but obviously, as you said, it's fluid. So it actually might be helpful to see this for multiple semesters to just really get a handle on what is each person, how is each person really filling their day and their schedule?
yeah, it's a harder, more layered response, right? But if a group is in intervention, those range between 3 to 5 students in a group, depending on their goal. So if a student is in a group, they should be working on the same goal, right? An interventionist needs to be focused. They're using a program that's very explicit to the goal that they're on. So it definitely depends on the goals that the individual students are in need of. And that's usually three times a week, 3 to 4 times a week, right? If they're in tier 3, it's even more intensive, and the group size gets even lower, could be 1 to 3, right? It's even smaller and even more intense because not only does the group size go down, but the number of times that they're pulled out of class not out of class, but the number of times that the interventionist is pulling a group is typically 4 to 5 times. So daily, potentially.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so it might be a similar caseload to a related service provider in special education.
Okay.
Is that I'm just kind of okay. In terms of frequency with which they're seeing these students.
Yes, tier 2 intervention. The goal is minimum 3 times a week. Typically it's 3 to 4 if we can schedule them in, because we don't want them to go to tier 3, right? But if it's tier 3, in order to see the return on investment and the result on the intervention programs that we're using, we'll reduce the size of the group and we increase the intensity. So it's 4 to 5 times a week, which is basically daily.
That's tier 3.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And just to give everyone some context too, when we make this section public, I also linked in the MTSS overview that we did for the Board of Education subcommittee that you can reference, that gives some more visuals around that structure, just so you have something to reference. I mean, I don't want to go through that one again. That was a whole hour presentation, but I put it in there as reference, and we can always come back to it if you're looking at it and you still have some further questions, or if you want me to bring some additional data. I have no problem doing that.
Okay, thank you. That was my question.
Great. Okay. So if we shift to the next slide, Deb had a question about the curriculum and instruction leaders, and how we decide how we allocate the FTE, the full-time equivalency to that role, and how do we assess their impact on instructional practice. So for those of you that might not know, a curriculum and instruction leader, a CIL, we strategically, or since I have gotten here, this position has been in existence, and over the last few years, we have really been strategically allocating that FTE on an instructional demand. If you recall, when I first started here, we were in the middle of researching and adopting new core curriculum. Reading was the focus and the priority at that time. And since then, we've been slowly implementing K-3 reading. We've also been updating our math K through 12 core resource throughout the district. And so that allocation of our CILs specifically, I know I gave examples for math and reading, but we look at the impact of the instructional demands, whether that be new curriculum, new resources that we're implementing, whether it's intervention support, and also the number of teachers that they support in a given school or across a given department. We also look at the complexity of the curriculum implementation, right? So these positions are instructional coaches. They help write curriculum. They help train our staff. They monitor and support and oversee a lot of the data analysis on our universal screeners. They help implement our district priorities and our school priorities. And so those assignments, since I have been here, range from 0.4 of an FTE. They've even ranged to full-time. Last year we had full-time CILs in place. This year, we have reduced the CIL position to range from 0.4 to 0.8 throughout the district. And these positions provide instructional leadership across all content areas. And while still balancing the reality that we understand that these structures to support the academic implementation, to support classroom teachers, come at a cost. So when I look at the evaluation on how much we want to allocate to a curriculum and instruction leader, this is the chart that we always go back to and reference. You can see that depending on the number of teachers that the CIL would support and whether or not they're housed in one building and whether or not they support multiple content areas is also something that we look at when we balance how much we want to allocate to this position. I will say that in our district here, there is no additional instructional leadership role from me and into the classroom other than them. They are the individual role. They are the resource. I call them the Velcro between district level implementation and classroom support. They are critical in translating our curriculum investments into high quality tier 1 instruction. If we focus and ensure that our tier 1 instruction is at its best, then the percentage of students in tier 1 and the percentage of students needing intervention increases in tier 1 and decreases in tier 2 and tier 3. So that's why these questions kind of all relate to each other. So they really help strengthen our tier 1 framework, our tier 1 support for all teachers across all the content areas. I will put my pitch in here that if I had my way and we didn't have to worry about, the dollars, and I would ask for full-time CILs in every content area per school. I have said that since I came here, so I'm going to be fully transparent again, since we have some new board members. So I'm just going to rinse and repeat that. They support teachers in implementing our curriculum with fidelity. As I said, they strengthen the instructional practice. They provide professional development. They analyze data and understand our assessments to a deeper extent than most others in the district. So they help us with that analysis. They also, because I just mentioned, last year we had a few positions in the core areas, in the literacy areas, the math, and it was really math and language arts literacy that were full-time. We've shifted back down to 0.8. That's the max that they currently are allocating their time for curriculum and leadership support. They either provide small group instruction on top of their curriculum and instruction leader job description, or they teach a class. So at the secondary level, you'll see the 6 through 12 CILs along with the K through 12 CILs. They take on classroom instruction responsibilities also this year. At the K-5 level, those CILs take on small group interventions or they pull small groups and support tier 1 instruction in a small group capacity. So this is the first part of the question regarding how we allocate the amount or the percentage of a CIL position in the district. The impact of the CILs, that we look at a variety of different metrics when we look at the impact. As I said before, their impact is resulting in our student achievement. They're directly related to the impact on reading, math, and science. Standardized metrics also are universal screening metrics, and they directly correlate to student outcomes related to student performance. They provide coaching cycles for classroom teachers. As I mentioned, they help lead with the Summer Curriculum Academy groups that I oversee, but they help support individual groups in ensuring that we maximize our time and we get a lot of our curriculum updates and our tasks done. They plan and deliver professional development for us throughout the district, whether that be on a PD day, whether that be during grade level team meetings. They help with the analysis of performance data and how to translate that data into actionable plans for classroom instruction with differentiation for our teachers, as well as for intervention support analysis when it comes to looking at our intervention support within our MTSS system. And so in short, our CILs are really that instructional bridge between curriculum adoption and student learning. They really work to strengthen tier 1 instruction, support an effective MTSS implementation. They oversee, as I said, our data analysis and ensure that the district investments that we've made in all different content areas in curriculum and in professional learning result in consistent, high quality teaching and learning, because they provide that regular, ongoing, embedded support throughout the day and throughout the year. So the request this year is to maintain the model. Last year, we adjusted the model. As I said, we used to have last year in 25, we used to have our core content areas were full-time CILs. We adjusted that model last year, which is this year, to 0.8 across the district, and in some cases 0.6 and 0.4, which was maintained. And we're asking that we maintain the same model this year as well. We don't want to reduce the support for the classroom instruction or reduce the support for professional development or reduce the support for tier 1 support. That is what has been allocated in the budget for next year, for the fiscal year 27.
Tina, I think David and I, we were both on the board when we implemented the CIL program.
Okay.
And I'm a fan. I'm a huge fan. And I was sad that we had to reduce last year. I'm concerned. And my concern is, any program that you put into place, you have to give it time to see results, right? And I think that we have seen results from the CIL program, to be perfectly honest with you. And that is in the form of our tests and our rankings, et cetera. My concern is we've cut back this year, and now we're cutting back further. And I just think we need to keep a really close eye on whether or not that's going to have an effect on our student results. So just raising the flag of awareness here. If that is the case, then we need to make sure that we reverse course and get back to full-time CILs, especially in the core areas in particular.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon, because that was the conversation last year when we went to this model, right? While we've seen growth, we also just want to be mindful that we want to maintain at least. We do have some areas to grow still. We're not. I still see a gap, that we'd like to be able to grow even further in our student outcomes. And while we've seen an overall improvement on our next generation accountability system, there are areas of growth. We talked about that at our last full board meeting. And so to your point, I am curious to see if we need to flex and we need to revert back to more of the whole full-time FTE support model for CILs in the core areas especially, based on this year's results.
Yeah, just keep an eye on it as the year is going along though, because I don't want to wait until the damage is completely done to try to reverse the damage. I would rather we've got high performing schools. We've got a blue ribbon school. We've, been ranked very highly. The high school's been ranked very highly. And I just don't want to have to find us taking a step back in order to take our step, to regain our position. So just keep a close eye on it as best you can. Obviously test results only come out once a year. But if you could just make sure that you're monitoring that closely.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And I will say the monitoring comes with some of the assessment data that we talked about today. Excuse me. But what I meant is the model, this is the model, and it's the model that we're requesting to maintain at minimum for next school year. So
Okay.
I think we need to your point, I think we need to continuously reflect on where we want to invest and focus our time and our resources to ensure that we maintain and even grow further in our academic achievement and the work that we've done so far when it comes to curriculum design and curriculum implementation.
Okay.
Tina, just to Sharon's point, we are the two people that were on the board when we moved SILs from 0.5, if I remember correctly, to full-time. Now they're 0.8, but they were 0.8 in our current budget, right?
They are. This is the model right now. This year is the first year that we've adopted this model of 0.8.
Right. So, but we are currently operating under this model.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And just for clarity, I think, Tina, I may have my timing wrong. I believe you're one that you kind of pushed to move the SILs from truly part-time, right? They were 0.5.
Yes, when I got here.
Okay. So I just want to clarify, budgets are tight. Our first and primary focus is obviously the outcome of the students. We haven't gone back to where we were. Matter of fact, we haven't even gone 50% back to where we were. This year we're operating under a small change. Next year, we're likely to operate under that small change. I just wanted to just kind of clarify for the rest of the board and the community. We were at half, at 0.5. We went to 1.0. We're operating under 0.8 this year. We're going to operate under 0.8 next year. And we'll look, and as I always say, we'll look at the data.
Yes, I agree. I would just like to clarify, when we talk about the flexibility or the adjustments to the CIL positions from 0.5 when I first started here in 22 to full-time and then back to 0.8, those are the core areas are the ones that we're talking about. In the K through 12 in the specialist areas, those have always been maintained in the models that are currently in existence.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I did have one other question which you might not be prepared to answer related to this. It was easy to understand back a couple of years ago when we went from 0.5 to 1.0, the cost, because you had to backfill for that time that the teacher wasn't going to be in front of the students. Do you have an idea number-wise with 0.8? I presume that they're essentially of the whatever you call them, sections they would be teaching. They're using one block, 0.2 of their time to teach 0.8 SIL.
If a secondary teacher, you're asking about the 6 through 12, because that's where this model can actually work. If they're 0.8, they teach one class and then they support classroom instruction and everything else we talked about in 2 schools in that one content area. You can see social studies though, teaches 2 classes and then provides academic support and teaching support across 2 schools. It's I'm going to just speak and advocate for the individuals that take on these roles. It is hard to maximize the support of classroom and teaching instruction and the true role and the essence of what a curriculum and instruction leader we're trying to do, and also balance the expectations in Weston to teach and prepare and deliver instruction. They are working under, these individuals are working under 2 job descriptions. It's very hard.
Okay, but for clarity, for the community, essentially, for each 0.2, you can roughly say 0.2 reflects classroom time.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Tina, I had just a couple of questions. First of all, thank you for pointing out the timeline and the FTE associated in the last few years with SILS. Going back to the academic support MTSS chart where you showed 9.8 FTE, I don't need to see it, but what I'm asking is, are some of these SILs included in that 9.8 FTE?
Correct. So, yes, so
Okay,
you might
that's all,
have a
that's all I need to know.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Well, obviously I'd like to know a lot more, but I'm also looking at the time. And my last question regarding SILs, and thank you for the very thorough explanation in their areas of support, and they're also kind of leadership so that we're at the forefront of implementation with quality. Have we asked the teachers directly in terms of another metric, in terms of how they feel about the support they receive? How, what do they see the differences in their practice being? Do we have any, and I guess what I'm asking, is there any teacher input? Because obviously they're the most directly affected. What's their take? And I'm not asking for it right now, but
Yeah.
I'm just asking if it's been collected, if there's a way to collect it, if it's even worth collecting.
It is definitely worth collecting, and we do collect it. One of the, we're always looking at how do we measure our effectiveness too, because it's an indirect effectiveness, right? Even as administrators. So qualitative data such as surveying the people that we work with around their experience has been a component of what we, as a CIL department and a group, that we've integrated within our practice. And so we do that on a yearly basis, and we can most certainly capture some of those if you're looking to see some of those quotes.
Yeah, maybe in a committee meeting or a board meeting down the road, that might be
Absolutely.
just helpful to get some teacher
Thank you.
feedback as well.
Great suggestion. I'm going to add that. Okay. So the next, so that completes that section. Actually, I'm sorry, we're moving on to enrollment, classroom sections, and teaming. Actually, that does shift into a different section. Erica, do you want me to just move right into the next portion?
Okay, just can I take a step back?
Yeah.
Maybe if you don't mind taking the slide away for a second. And I'm just looking at our time, and I know that we have scheduled longer for this workshop, and that's absolutely fine. But I'm also doing sort of a check-in with attention spans and schedules and other obligations. So I'm kind of trying to get a sense, maybe Erica, from you in terms of your staff, is this a good break, or are you ready to continue? And then board members, are we able to continue and maintain a quorum?
Thank you, Deb. I appreciate that consideration. I think we are okay to continue. Team, yeah. We're heading into the enrollment, classroom sections, and teaming. We do have some additional visuals for the board that will help move the questions along a little bit. And the questions are a little bit more straightforward relative to classroom enrollment sections and the reduction of that and what it translates into in terms of teaming model. So maybe we can spend another half hour working through some of those section and enrollment questions.
Sure. Okay, and board members, does that sound okay with you? All right,
Yeah.
all right, let's aim for another half hour, and then if we need to take another time check, we will. All right, so thank you.
Great. So the next series of questions, Jen D'Amico and I are going to take. The questions are related to the fifth grade model of instruction, the instructional model that we provide in Weston. So David, you asked about like, how does that impact, how does the enrollment impact the teaming model, right? How does the sections impact the grade 5 teaming model? If we reduce sections, what does that mean for enrollment? And then Sharon, you asked a very similar question around what happens if we go from the 8 sections to 7 sections? And what does that mean for the 5th grade current instructional model? So just to give you some context, I went back and I was curious to find out, when did we transition from a traditional environment where one teacher teaches all content areas to a teaming model, which is very important to recognize that when in education, when we talk about teaming models come in different forms, right? We'll talk about the middle school teaming model, which is one instructional model. And then we'll talk right now about the 5th grade teaming model, which is a 2-teacher team model. And we transitioned, to give you some context, in Weston during the 2018-19 school year into the 2-teacher teaming dyad model. And this is where we've organized 2 teachers into a team, whereby one teacher teaches math and science instructional blocks, the other teaches the reading and writing blocks, and both teachers teach social studies to their own classes. And at that time, back in 2018-19, if you remember, the state had just implemented and adopted the new standardized test in science known as NGSS. It was the first year that we implemented or were expected to administer that test. And at that time, the reason for that shift was that the grade 5 teachers were implementing a new curriculum as a result of that new test. And we wanted to ensure that the science instruction was being scheduled into the daily schedule and taught consistently. And I know that because I went back into the notes on the Board of Ed Curriculum Subcommittee and read through what the message was. So the original intent was to ensure that the teachers had sufficient time to plan and effectively implement the science curriculum, so that they were preparing students, let's say, for this NGSS test at the end of the year. The achievement across other content areas seemed to be directly impacted. So I went back and looked at some achievement data because I figured, I was curious. So I think I made a slide, a little chart. I just was curious to see. So when we shifted from 18 to 19 into this 2-team dyad model, what did our student achievement look like? So even though it was specifically for science reasons to ensure that we could implement the curriculum with some fidelity and consistency, we seem to have got some additional benefits from changing that instructional model. So, which was a great thing. So we have since maintained that model even through COVID, and we know we had a hiccup with COVID, and we're rebuilding some of our academic outcomes, but we can see that we've really maintained some of that high levels of performance and achievement over the last, my goodness, many years since 2018-19. And we also know that through research, if you look it up, there are a lot of benefits to having a teaming model, especially as students get older and into the upper elementary grades. When they have fewer teachers that teach fewer content areas, those teachers are able to develop a deeper level of expertise. They plan more effectively. They deliver stronger instruction in those subjects. The school benefits when teachers are matched within their strongest subject areas, particularly in the math and science area, because they tend to gravitate and they have more comfortability in certain subject areas. And so again, they're able to deliver higher quality instruction. A lot of times we see that there becomes, a stronger relationships that are developed when students have multiple teachers. They get to improve and have multiple relationships, not just with one teacher, but across multiple teachers. And that helps, have more opportunities to build a sense of belonging with not just one teacher, but multiple teachers. Excuse me. We see that as students get older, there's smoother transitions because we're rotating among smaller sets of teachers and help students prepare for some of that middle grade or middle school environment. Sorry. And so with that also comes some trade-offs. We do know that there comes a financial responsibility if we want to maintain this model, because in order to have a dyad model, you have to maintain an even number of teachers so that there's a team. And it also makes sure that when it comes to scheduling, you need to make sure for it to be effective, you need to make sure that the schedule allows for times for them to have common planning time.
Tina, I'm going to jump in a little bit here for you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, so a few things. Sharon, I wanted to address your question about those odd numbers. So are there ways that we could make this work? Certainly. We could have one class be self-contained. We could have a group do a 3-teacher model. And I have reservations about both of those things because we really believe in the 2-teacher team. We think it's a very strong model. It's been very successful. The teachers have opportunities to plan with each other, to do some things across grade levels, do some transitioning. They can support kids with SEL needs across those different kinds of things. They have different personalities as teachers, and they support those students in those different ways as they're growing and changing. 5th grade is one of those times when students are starting to become middle schoolers, and they're supporting them in that. So I think that is also very helpful. The students like having a little bit more of that freedom and opportunity to become more independent. So they are also managing those transitions. So that executive functioning skill of going from one class to another, taking your things, making sure you have everything, that's something we have to develop and explicitly teach. And we have the opportunity to do that when we have that 2-teacher team. In my opinion, when you add a 3rd teacher to that, if you try to use those odd numbers, you have multiple transitions. You lose a little bit more instructional time. And I think to me, it feels too much for students of this age to be able to do that. And I don't want to lose that instructional time for students as we are making sure we get into that reading, that writing, that math, that science. That was our intention. In addition, if we do a self-contained classroom, we take away the experience of all those other things that I just said were things that are really positive for our students. So could we manage with odd numbers if we had to? Sure, we could do that, but I don't think the experience would be the Weston experience we want to give to our students. In addition, we talked about a team of 8 or a team of 6. And I think when you look at those numbers, if we went to 6, we would definitely start increasing those classroom sizes outside of the guidelines that the Board of Education has put into place. And I know we've had parent comments. There's been lots of conversations about the board that we really value making sure that we stay within those guidelines because we've seen the positive impact of that personalization. So for all of those reasons, I feel very strongly that I would like to support this teaming model, and I would like to stay with those 2-teacher teams.
Thanks, Jen. Sorry, y'all. Appreciate you jumping in. David, this visual, I just want to clarify, it also answers Sharon and David's questions about grade 5 specifically, but then it also answers one of David's questions regarding modeling one less section across K-5. So the green band looks at option 1 with the number of sections and how many students and how many open seats it would allow. And then you go to option 2, which is a different variety of sections. And I know Jen was just referencing the 7-section model at grade 5, but then going to the yellow portion, which is option 2 there, if you veered away and said, okay, let's keep the teaming model at 5th grade, but then what do the different sections look like in K4? Yeah, I would just like to shout out to, the intermediate school. I think we all can agree that our current models and instructional models have really returned a really great return on investment. We've had a lot of accolades at the intermediate school, whether it be that they were just named one of the 4 public schools in the state, recognized as a Connecticut Blue Ribbon school. And I will say that correlating some of that outcomes or the performance since 2018 and 19, when we transitioned to this model, can't ignore that we've had 3 consecutive years of being recognized at the intermediate school as a school of distinction. So just some pieces of information, food for thought, and just kind of piggyback on what Jen was just talking about, and what we would like to support is maintaining that team model at the 5th grade level, and ensuring that we also look at the number of students that are in those sections too, so that we can individualize and support the students as needed.
Tina, I just don't have a hand in the board book. So right now we're operating with option 1, 8 sections for grade 5. Is that right? And the ask for next year is the same.
Yes.
And the open seat, that is based on next year's medium projections?
Yes, just to give everyone context, all of our scenarios are based on medium projections.
Okay. What is the projection based on low? And if you don't have it right now, don't mean to, so if you can, again, I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah,
but
we did not make a chart for the low. I know that if I
We
look in the
have-
budget.
We do have supplemental charts that we will attach a link into our public responses where you'll be able to take a look at it by high, medium, low enrollment. We just wanted to summarize it here using medium projection for the purposes of demonstrating and explaining. But for the public, David, and if you wanted to delve in a little bit further, there will be additional charts using the high, medium, and low projection through the same model.
Yeah. And
Could I just add that our current enrollment in grade 4 would actually be 146, which is a little higher than the number that is on here. It's 4 students more. We currently have seated in 4th grade at this time.
actually, Jen, thank you, because for my purposes, my next one I was going to say was, if I simply took the 4th grade, which is, it's not 137, it's 142, you said?
Sorry, our current 4th grade is 146.
140, okay. Versus the 137, that's what's projected for next year on the medium.
That is
scale.
correct.
Okay.
If I could add just for some color, the low enrollment projections for K-5 generally only reflect a change of 1 student. So there's not a really significant difference K-5 between the low and medium projections.
David, just if you're looking back at the chart, the current grade 3 is 135. If that helps.
Yeah,
Because
I think, and what Julia just said. So essentially, if we took grade, so yeah,
So
if we took.
So we're going to have the next 2 years, we're going to have small classes. Grade 3 and grade 4 are small right now, smaller than the current grade 5. So rolling forward, we're going to continue to bump up against this in grade 5.
Right. Okay. And so we don't expect when this model is shown, and I think why not show it with the small for all K-5, but I think the focus for my purposes anyway, it's grade 5 and the teaming model. So if the low projection is not going to change the 142 number significantly, at 8 sections, in order to keep the dyad, we have 50 open seats or 17.8 kids per class. If you went to 7 sections, you broke the dyad. Now,
Can I just ask a question? So I really believe in the teaming model. I think teacher expertise is really important. We're looking at that model of odd number of classes, and we don't want to bring in the singleton model. Isn't it possible to keep that teaming model and having team teachers teach an example? If I'm looking at it like if there were two singletons being expertise in both, if it were so, the third and fourth grade model. So you had a team that could teach two singleton classes that, although it might have the teachers have a broader range of expertise, it could work with the students.
I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, I do. I've been in a system where we did that, where let's say you have odd numbers in a grade level, you team up the odd number out across grade levels. I will say that we did it for 1 year and we dissolved that model because the amount of prep and the amount of the quality of instruction across learning multiple content areas, multiple grade levels was not effective. We could talk about it. I wouldn't recommend it.
So Tina, just to put in more layman's terms, maybe for Sharon and my benefit, and I probably for the benefit of the community. So with 7, we're not talking about breaking the dyad insofar as there would be some group of students that would only have one teacher. What we're breaking is the even number of 5th grade teachers. So what we're talking about is taking a 4th grade teacher or even potentially a 3rd grade teacher, and we're asking them to teach to 2 different grade levels. Is that what happens when you have an odd number?
And you also have, yes, except that in that model I gave you, I provided you, we were dyads in multiple grade levels. That was the only way that it works.
So hold on, if instead of taking, so for example, if we have 8 teachers in 5th grade, that means we have 4 groups, right? So instead of doing 4 groups, if we broke it down to 3 groups and had one of the groups have a teacher who's a science, a teacher who's reading, and a teacher who is doing social studies, say, for example. And Jennifer, I think that your point was the class change would decrease the amount of instructional time available by one class change period, correct?
Yeah, so we don't operate like the middle school with periods and we're switching every 42
Right.
minutes. Things look very different. And so
Yeah.
that scheduling shift and even where our specials fall and all of that elementary model is very different. So the alignment where we could kind of share teachers in that way would be very challenging. We do not currently team in 4th grade or 3rd grade, so we would not have the opportunity with our current model to be able to share teachers across grade levels. I also have some reservations about that because the content of 3rd, 4th, just developmentally, what it looks like, understanding all of that, being part of that team would be a lot. They're not just teaching one content area. Remember, is even in that dyad model, they're teaching 3 different content areas, and an elementary person in a single classroom is teaching reading, writing, math, science, and social studies. That's a big responsibility, a lot to know, a lot to differentiate for. So if I am now asking that instructor to go between grade levels and take on all of those things and understand them well, I am asking a lot of that instructor, more so than I'm probably asking of any other instructor across the district. So I would have reservations about that.
Sure. I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is if we had 7 5th grade teachers and we had them in there, 2 of them were in the dyads and the other one would be in a triad, right? So we have a 5th grade teacher who'd be teaching that group of 5th grade students, perhaps instead of making a little bit more of a middle school-esque environment in that they're teaching social studies, right? Or, they each have their classroom, but they change going math, reading, social studies. That's what I'm suggesting. Is that something that you think would have a negative impact on the students?
So I actually have experience with this from my own personal children. They were in a space in fifth grade where they ended up having this odd man out and had to do a triad, and they did choose to do that. I found it extremely challenging as a parent. I found it extreme being in contact with all three of those teachers. I think it's very important for our parents to have that close relationship with all teachers and be able to have that conversation back and forth. So doing conferences and being able to talk to each of them and have that access was more challenging for me as a parent. In addition, I found it very challenging for two of my children to manage between those three classes. Another one of my children was in that triad and they were okay, but they had very strong executive functioning skills. So I would be a little nervous for our students who are building those executive functioning skills. And I do think this is an important time for us to be doing that. So I do think the transition between three teachers has a few pitfalls that just raise a few red flags for me. Is it doable? Could we figure it out? Could we manage it? Of course we could. We could always figure those things out. It would not be my first choice.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Right.
That's
I
okay.
also think we want to think about equitable experiences for all of our fifth grade students. And I think it's pretty clear based on, what Principal D'Amico is sharing and what Tina's sharing, and just from your general questions, that we place a high value on this dyad model. It's yielding great academic outcomes. It's clear and coherent. We've matched educators in content areas with their expertise, and it's yielding great outcomes. So just to disrupt that, and not offer the same academic experience to all kids in that grade level, I would think would be detrimental.
Can I think for my purposes, I don't think breaking the dyad, I don't think option 2 or 7 sections it's not, I appreciate that you put it on here. So if we focus on keeping the dyad, keeping an even number of teachers at the 5th grade, and I agree with everything that Erica, you said, Jennifer, you've said, both the students benefit from having teachers who are subject matter experts and aren't moving back and forth, and teachers benefit from that. My couple other questions are, what is the student to teacher ratio roughly in 6th grade per class? And again, I didn't ask this question ahead of time, so if you want to defer to a future, that's fine. And I'm kind of seeing Deb's thinking that's the right way to go. So let's just, if we can get that question answered for next time, but I'll give you some clarity why I'm asking that, and that can be also answered next time. I'm not looking to break the system, and I have two children, one finishing completion of 5th grade at WIS who's benefited, right? So you're not going to find probably a bigger champion of WIS than I love everything about that school, the age, the building. But that said, my question is going to be, I look at the class sizes, and it's sacrosanct to go into lower grades and change class sizes. Small size is Weston, individual education is Weston. But when I look at the 5th graders and I see, for example, 17.8 kids in the classroom and 50 open seats with medium enrollment, and medium enrollment has historically always been wrong. The kids that are going into 5th grade, I don't have the number from this year, but is it roughly 22 kids in a classroom, or are 20?
Yeah, it's because of like the inventors and innovators in 6th grade, you have about 160 kids, 80 per team, 4 major classes, 20 per class.
Jason,
we have 172 students in 6th grade currently, and there's 8 sections, so it comes out to about 21.5.
Okay. And so the reason I'm asking is because I understand transition years are important, transition years are hard. Middle school is hard to begin with, just as a child's body is developing and stuff like that. So I would like to know again what the class size is for 6th grade, projected to be next year, maybe the past couple of years, because it would help inform whether or not 23.7 with 2 open seats, when medium enrollment is rarely accurate, really puts it, would we be at 23.7 kids? And I understand 23.7 means, right? It basically means there will be some number of classes with 22 kids and some number, actually it'd be some number of classes with 22 kids and some number of classes with 23 kids, right? That's just how it breaks out.
I believe it's some with 23 and some with 24.
Yeah, it's between, yeah,
Okay.
David, it would be some
Yeah.
with 23, some with 24. I do
Okay.
think, and maybe you want to refine the numbers that were in the budget book, but some of the class size projections information, I think, are in the budget book for next year.
Yeah, page
even for the
78,
middle
David.
school.
Page 78, David, if you want to look at, I mean, again,
I think it's 159 is the projected number for sixth grade.
And just a reminder that the current 4th grade class at WIS has 146 kids. So when you're looking at this chart, the median projection is 142. If every single 4th grade student stays at WIS next year and goes into 5th grade, there's 146 students in 5th grade next year.
And I think I mean, we can look at it, but I also thought I heard Julie say the difference at the elementary level projections between I'm sorry, low and medium is not that big to begin with.
For grade 5, the low projection for grade 5 for 26-27 is 141 students.
All right, so it's 141. Okay.
All right,
So we're really looking, yeah, our decision, if you want to call it that, our examination is between 8 and 6. I think we've agreed that 7 is just for all sorts of crazy reasons not it. And then there becomes a class size issue. So keep that in your mind. You know, there are always trade-offs and benefits and all of that, and looking at our bottom line, but also maintaining the excellence that Weston is known for and not threatening it. So I think we understand the issue involved in grade 5. It basically is 8 or 6. And so board members can mull that over. We absolutely have heard the recommendations from the educators. And we now know that the difference between a different enrollment projection is only 1 student. And we also know reality on the ground has more students. Doesn't mean that some of them aren't going to move out of town. I get that. I do think moving forward, though, when we get into smaller total classes enrollment, to Sharon's point, that might be an even better time to look at 8 versus 6. It may be coming. I'm just not sure that this is the year.
Thank you for summing that up, Deb.
All right. Any more? I'm also looking at the time. I'm sorry. Just because if there's more material to get through. So where do we go next? Unless there are more questions. I don't mean to cut people off, but it seems like we have kind of thoroughly examined the grade 5 situation.
Yes. If there are no more questions, we have one additional question that's very somewhat related for grade 6 through 8 with the teaming model. And if we can get through that question, then I think we can pause there and resume at the next meeting.
So I'll start this question. David, you were asking specifically about, as you just did right now, the teaming model in the middle school and what would it look like or what would require if we reduced by 2 sections. So I'll just start with some overview pieces and then, Jason, please chime in and take over. See how far I can get through without coughing. So while you have your teaming instructional design hat on, we're going to shift from a teaming model like in 5th grade with 2 teachers to the middle school teaming structure, which is where you have a team of 4 core teachers. They teach ELA, math, science, and social studies, and they share the same group of students within their schedule. So a middle school teaming model also has a lot of benefits based on the research. You're creating a smaller learning community within a bigger middle school, which improves adult to student connection and consistency. I think there is I don't know the research, the name of the guy, but I do know that the number of developmental stages of a middle schooler from 6 to 8 is the same number of stages from birth to 3. sit on that one for a minute, right? So when kids get to middle school, a lot of these systems and structures developmentally for social emotional learning really weighs even heavier than maybe some other areas, other grades. And having 3 middle schoolers go through, I would concur. So the benefits of the teaming structure at the middle school. We know that it supports collaborative teaming environments too. It's designed to create a shared responsibility among the team of teachers. They help to coordinate interventions, they align expectations. And as Jen mentioned, even in the dyad model in 5th grade, it helps the parents be more connected with a team of teachers that are more consolidated and focused, so that they kind of all the teachers kind of rally around their students in a more collaborative, supportive way. So it also allows for some interdisciplinary work that we might want to do around curriculum enhancement and enrichment. And we know that also it allows us to have more opportunities for the team to coordinate around single groups of students, depending that, as I mentioned before, whether it's intervention or enrichment, that would be beneficial to a smaller group of students rather than trying to coordinate for the entire school. So when you get to scheduling though, right, there's always a trade-off, a give to get. So some of the limitations with the teaming model is that it becomes very complicated. And when it comes to some of the special area teachers, whether world language and elective types of courses, it does pose sometimes structural scheduling components if you start breaking up the teams. So the middle school specifically is built on this teaming model, and the sections function with rotating student cohorts. So for next year, the enrollment projections show that the cleanest option in order to maintain this model is 8 sections per grade, which is 24 total, and 8 sections per grade and 7 and 8 across all for 7 and 8. 6 sections in grade 2, which is 22 total. So a reduction of only 2 sections overall would actually create a rethinking of the structure of the teaming model. You could look at different grade levels, but then if you start restructuring the grade levels, you're starting to get into how our support specialists fit into those schedules as well. So sometimes if you want to shift the structure, just looking at the core content areas, you tend to potentially increase the number of support you need in the special areas in order to ensure that, as Erica mentioned, ensure that students have access and equitable access to other programming beyond the core areas. So that's what our overview shows, that we requested 24 total core subject areas. And I believe it's reflected on page 78 in the budget book. The structure is organized by grade around those cohorts, as I mentioned, and therefore the budget request for the 26-27 school year is based again on those medium enrollment projections, which would require approximately 8 cohorts per grade. And if we reduced it by 2 sections, 22 core subject classroom teachers, that means a reconfiguration of the teaming within a grading model into that triad model that you're talking about before, which then breaks the structure and the whole benefits of the teaming model in that building, and potentially the scheduling implications that result in it as well. Jason, do you want to add anything to this piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, the only thing I would say, and I thank you for all that. I agree with everything that you said in terms of why the teaming model as it exists is important, and why I strongly support it. The other thing that it allows us to continue with is this workshop class. So teachers each have 4 sections of an academic subject that they teach. Workshop is their 5th class. Currently, it's really it's a combination of enrichment, and sometimes it's also sometimes used for things that they don't necessarily have the time to cover in the regular curriculum, like as they're going through the curriculum. So It's also used for extra help, but we have some ideas in how we want to use it even more robustly going forward, including, and we started some executive functioning classes this year using that block, which we want to expand. We also have some SEL work that we want to continue to do. You know, the culture at the middle school and all, the community that we're trying to create and enhance, this could be a real opportunity for us to use that workshop block for that as well. So I don't know if we went to 22 sections, I don't know what it would become a scheduling thing. I don't know what that would do to that particular block and how that would work. I would also like to reiterate something that was said about the elementary school. If the idea is that um, teaching multiple subjects at the fifth grade level, the content becomes more and more sophisticated. If we went to some sort of a triad model in sixth grade, the teachers would have to teach more than one subject. So it becomes more and more content heavy and sophisticated to do that. So that's something that would make it a little trickier. Right now, they're really content specialists along with, you know, working interdisciplinary and really being experts in kids this age. So that would be my add-on.
Thank you, Jason. Any other, so that was kind of our summary regarding the middle school teaming structure and the implications about reducing sections. It's a lot more complicated than just reducing the numbers.
Any questions? All right, thank you. And Jason, just picking up on the academic workshop, that seems like there's a lot of potential there. And I'm glad to hear that, you know, looking at the content of and trying to perhaps make that a little bit more structured in some areas. So thank you for that thought.
Yeah.
And I think I understand, you know, you either have a whole team or you don't have a whole team. And it has to come in clumps of 4. Am I right there? Okay.
Pretty much, yeah, yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to like follow it all. Okay, so if there are no more questions around middle school teaming and resulting class sizes, I'm not sure what was remaining for today, if anything.
There are 2 more questions in this enrollment classroom section
Okay.
space. So if everybody's good, we can continue. If not, this would be a good place to pause and we can resume responding to questions at the next meeting.
Okay, I'm all right, but I'm looking at board members, whether more of you need to peel off or not.
I just need to log on and see what's going on with work. And if I do have a conflict, I'll jump off. But if I don't, I'm happy to stay.
Okay.
Yeah, I can stay. I have a hard stop at 12, but is that
Okay. All right. Well, why don't we plunge ahead and yeah, let's just do this.
Great.
Because we've got to come to you know, the harder discussion in terms of you know, the whole package. So let's get through some of the details. Thank you.
Great. All right, so David asked another question at the high school level now. He was asking about minimum enrollment and whether or not is there a minimum enrollment required for electives, and what that is to ensure we're getting an academic return on investment. So I'll start, and of course, you know, Megan and Julie, you're welcome to chime in, of course, afterwards. So as you all know, at the high school level, there's elective offerings, and we review those elective offerings annually. Those elective offerings, if you're on the curriculum subcommittee, we review those and go through them every year to look at student interest and try to ensure that we provide a robust program at the high school. And we look at enrollment as an important consideration across everything that we do. You could see that with all of our responses. There is a board policy that defines 15 as a minimum class size with flexibility when the nature of the subject is specialized, such as advanced offerings, or when the subject requires high levels of adult supervision, right? So last night, for example, Tracy talked about the Pathways program, okay? Decisions to offer, modify, or pause a course are based on multiple factors. So as I mentioned, we look at student interest, need. Sometimes, when a state requires a certain course like personal finance, like that is taken into consideration as well. Alignment to graduation requirements as well, because they do have to have a certain number of elective courses. Staffing capacity. So, how are we aligning and connecting what we currently have for resources in order to implement that new elective? Department programming, we look at post-secondary expectations, and of course, fiscal impact. So our primary focus is ensuring that all students have access to the courses they need to meet graduation requirements. That's always, a primary focus and at the forefront, particularly in courses where the credits are required in specific areas, right? In these cases, enrollment thresholds are applied with flexibility. In some instances, courses may be offered on a rotating or every other basis, right? So we don't want to dissolve the course. So maybe we offer it 1 year, and then the next year we don't, and then the next year we offer it again. And that helps support sustainable enrollment while also maintaining a high quality and rigorous programming offering at the high school. Student course selection data and interest trends are always reviewed on a yearly basis. The counseling department helps support that work. And that's part of how we look at scheduling and programming planning throughout the yearly process of the program of studies and looking at the courses that we offer. And that's done. The CILs help support that work in partnership and conjunction with our administrators at the high school. And we're always looking to expand and strengthen our elective offerings while also weaving in the data that we gather and in conjunctions with the decisions that we make that best serve students and ensure that we are fiscally responsible while also making sure that the programming that we offer that kids are interested in taking and it's aligned to their career and college pathways beyond Weston. So Megan, or Julie, I don't know if you guys wanted to add in anything around that question around minimum enrollment for electives.
Sure. I'll just add that our course selection process starts the end of January and continues through the spring. And we are always analyzing student wants and student needs. So in our program of studies, you'll see, I think Tina mentioned it, we have classes that we have said, okay, based on enrollment, we're going to offer access to this class every other year. So we have classes such as AP Chemistry, AP Music Theory, where you may see that there's lower enrollment, but we also believe that those are really crucial classes as students begin to plan for their post-secondary experiences and to make them really healthy, viable candidates to the institutions that they're applying to. Additionally, we have consistently, the last couple of years, we have had more interest in classes than we have had sections to run. So we're also very mindful of the age and grade of the students who have interests. So there may be courses, for example, like a creative writing, where we have more students that are interested in taking the class than we have sections. So in that case, we prioritize our upper level students who have a limited time to have that experience, knowing that sometimes our 9th and 10th grade students will have more time to have that access to that class. So we are trying our best. And as you know, the enrollment of the high school is not clearly indicative of the number of sections we need. It certainly is in certain grade level courses, like in English, like a science, a biology, or chemistry. But as students age into high school, we have 8 periods in a day. Students often want to fill those 8 periods. They have a wide array of interests. And we do want to treat 9th and 10th grade as those survey opportunities where they can take a multitude of electives and then they're honing their interests and skills. Because some are also trying to figure out what they want to major in, and what school that they might want to apply to upon their exit from Weston High School. So it's sometimes we have numbers to help us predict, and we are always having to make those hard decisions. I can tell you we had more students last year who were interested in taking classes in the arts than we had classes to provide for them. So it is, there's a lot of decision making and a lot of conversations, and often a lot of conversations with students and families that have to come as a result of some of the constraints in our scheduling.
Thanks, Megan. David, I know you're the one that started this question. I just want to make sure that it fulfilled your the response fulfilled your question. And does anyone else have any follow-up questions?
It did. Thank you. It's sort
You're
of my
welcome.
go-to question every year because it's a check and balance for us. I don't have any other questions on this topic.
I
You
do.
know what? I agree. It's a check and balance for us. I have to say that there are times where I take a look and I see some other high schools and some of their offerings, and I'm jealous. I'm jealous that we just don't have the population to offer some of those classes too. So, the small class size, as much as, we're kind of like trying to be fiscally responsible, it hurts. I think that when we're trying to give our students the depth and breadth of the education that we want to give them to make sure that they are highly competitive students, in the university setting, that we have to make some of these smaller classes available to them, especially some of our top performing students. So actually all students, but those top performing is kind of really, yeah. Anyway, here we go.
So I do have a follow-up question. So I heard two divergent stories here. One is we don't offer AP chemistry every year because only 3 or 4 kids really like elements and molecules. So therefore, why are we throwing an expensive teacher at a few kids? So that's our fiscally responsible. Let's just get 6, 9, or 12 kids because it's a less cost per kid for that teacher class. That diverges with AP psychology or the arts, where 80 kids want to take that. We have 2 teachers. We're busting at the seams, right? I mean, that meets the metric of really low cost per kid educational offerings. So maybe I suggest we start going back to what I think Lisa Luff's kids had the benefit of having, night school. If you have night school, right, you can offer AP chemistry every year. It's not a scheduling complex, and the 3, 4, 5, 6 ambitious kids can do what they need to do that year. But you can also offer more sections of AP psychology, the fine arts, and I forget where the other big popular class was, maybe government. So it seems to me that solves most problems in not starving kids that are ambitious of their class that year, satisfying really curious kids that want to take some interesting classes, and not disrupting 7:30 to 3:30 scheduling. That's just my input for consideration.
David, I appreciate that perspective. I don't know that
Wait,
class would.
That was Peter.
Peter, I always do that. I am really sorry.
Peter.
I don't know why.
But it's all right. And actually, to go back to something David said, I actually was there when Tina was hired and we did the SIL program. But it's okay. I'm sort of invisible in the back now. It seems that's where I've faded out to.
I said that, Peter, not David. I said that. Sorry about that. Sorry, you're right.
That.
My bad. You were here with us the whole time. But I'm going to ask a question, Megan, before you get into it. Lisa, your children benefited from this night school. Is that correct?
So it was a very competitive class. And it was around, the teacher had, after my youngest took him, retired, but he was a class and it was very competitive to get into. The students, it was a pretty competitive process. It was a social studies class, and they took it in the evenings.
And so it was offered to, because it wasn't offered during the day, or because they didn't have enough space in the regular classes, in the regular AP classes during the day, that this retired teacher came back and taught it in the evening. Is that how it's structured? And also,
I just knew it as a very special class to get into. Students had to have certain requirements to be able to get into it. And for my kids, they really, really wanted to take the class.
And do you know if it was just a 1 year that this occurred, or was it multiple years? Was this a
No, it was 1 year.
Okay, all right.
1 year.
And because there's Peter, I understand, and trust me, in a world of kaleidoscope, what can we grab and what can we keep? That's great, but that's adding cost in right now if we start, opening up the schools at night and having a class at night and things like that too. So I'm hesitant to add to the budget for night classes. I hear you, and as far as offering, students classes that they want to get into and not having to wait another year to take AP chemistry, but at the same time, we just have to balance at this stage. Lisa, you were saying?
Yeah, have we considered, Zoom classes? Right now, we have students have the ability to take college classes, computer classes, learning at their own pace, and completing them. And sometimes you can offer class periods where 20 students are in a classroom supervised by a pedagogue to support their learning, but they're taking different subject areas in that one class. Do we offer that?
So Lisa, I really appreciate everybody's thinking. I think we're all on the same page. I can give the example of our jazz ensemble as a class that occurs at night. It is 0.2 of a teacher's teaching, full-time equivalency. And that is really because students may also be taking other classes during the day and truly can't fit it, right, in order to really have a really amazing jazz ensemble. And so that is something that has kind of been built into the architecture of Weston High School. The online courses, Lisa, that you're talking about, we've partnered over the years with Apex. Apex has now been bought by a larger company, Edmentum. And so this year we're really embedding some of those courses and giving students some access. Our goal, and I'm partnering with Dr. Henkel on this, is to really look at how we can provide access. Sometimes students have free periods in the day, or they have free time opposite health or PE or their labs, or those moments in the day that students may be able to take an elective course that they may not have access to Sharon's point. Like we have I know in area high schools, one of my children is actually benefiting from a business program in an area high school that we just don't have the capacity to start here yet. I say yet because it's a hope and a dream. But that's where we may be able to. We have some students who are about to engage in an accounting class online, and so depending on what our capacity is and what our budget is for that online environment for students, and how we're determining who needs and who maybe wants access to some of those. So that's something that's an ongoing conversation at the high school.
Yeah, if I could just add one more piece here, because we too, and Peter, you're always thinking outside the box, and I appreciate that. We are always thinking outside the box too, to meet the needs of our students, because many times, like Megan said, it's individualized. We do have a policy. It's policy 6146.2 for students to earn credit for online courses. They need to be pre-approved, and we are open to that dialogue and that discussion when it comes in front of us, and our director of school counseling, who helps support this work as well as our college and career counselor. We are in ongoing conversations around what are the opportunities, how does it connect to graduation requirements, and how does it support the students' credit and transcript in order to get them approved. So I want to make sure for those that are listening, if that's an area that they're interested in, they make sure they read that policy, because there's some pre-work that goes into that before we move and go down that road.
And just my final thought because we highlighted AP chemistry specifically, that really is a result of the requests that students are making. And the students, when they get to 11th and 12th grade, they have a number of AP courses in each content area that they can choose from. So we're basing it not on availability and the constraints of the schedule. When we say we're going to offer a class like that every year, we're basing that on the number of requests, like historically evaluating that year over year.
Yeah, I think that's, a mark of being efficient, and working with a small environment. And it does take some student planning, just looking ahead. AP Chem, I'll take it as a junior or a senior. So I think that's a great way of being efficient and still maintaining program. Lisa's ideas and Peter's ideas about sort of going outside the lines, I think is great. And I think, just like Jason indicated that he's looking at the academic workshop at the middle school level, seeing what other aspects of students' interests and support needed. I'm trying to suggest that I think at the high school, such as Wilton, because we are small, that we absolutely need to start being a little bit, and I think maybe it's good for all learners, no matter the size of the high school, to be a little bit more creative, with not only online, but perhaps more internships, more independent studies, smaller groups, that don't meet, get beyond the everyday inside the school classroom idea. I think, we have a great environment to be creative. Not this year, not right now. But I just think for future planning, let's look at, different structures for offering high school programs. And Megan, you mentioned a pathway through business. I mean, whatever it is, and Peter's always doing the STEM interests, like how can we augment the tremendous teachers we have and the personal environment and be creative within that, kind of try to take advantage in a way of our size. If we talk about personalization on the social emotional level and the academic progress level, maybe we could think about it in terms of the learning spaces as well. So, okay, so where are we with questions? Sorry,
So
going
there's
back to
only one
reality.
more, and I'm giving it back to Erica. That can, unless anyone has any questions on David's question. We had one more here, and Erica was going to take the lead on that.
Yes, this is the last question of this section, so we will be completing an entire section before moving on at our next meeting. David, you asked, where does declining enrollment show up in the budget? And what you mean by that is the private sector, when there is less demand for something, you generally see a scale back in resources providing the services. So I think I shared in the Board of Education presentation on the enrollment slide that small enrollment declines, such as the net loss of 34 students for next year across pre-K-12, does not automatically result in staffing or classroom section reductions. Sometimes, unlike the private sector, where you could have a decreased demand that leads to immediate reductions in production and staffing, school districts operate with fixed costs and ongoing service obligations that are not always reduced by minor short-term enrollment changes like 34 students. So even with a modest decline, we remain legally obligated to provide instruction, special education services, related services, and tiered support, as Tina alluded to today, for all students. And we know that enrollment is fluid throughout the year. And so students may leave and students may come in, and the students who come in may have significantly higher academic, behavioral, or specialized needs than those who move out. And that could increase the cost despite a overall over-enrollment. So as a result, staffing and spending decisions don't always align directly with enrollment totals or headcount. I know we heard from Tracy last night, and she talked about the shift in trends and the increase of the number of special education students that we're seeing in district. And so that's a factor to consider. So one other thing I just sort of wanted to expose here was, in addition, most of employee costs for us are governed by collective bargaining agreements, with salaries and benefits and, working conditions that are negotiated over for multiple years. Some private sector corporations and employers have more flexibility in the way they compensate or bonus people. And it's just difficult for us to adjust staffing or compensation in response to these small enrollment shifts. And our goal is to maintain stable staffing to meet contractual, legal, and educational obligations. Happy to entertain any additional questions specific to that.
I think, and I asked Phil about this last night, because we've heard the concern that, hey, when our enrollment was X, we had 100 teachers, and now our enrollment is less than X, and we still have 100 staff. I'm sorry, staff members. I think it might be important if we could get it on one place to show that yes, maybe the total number of FTE across the whole district is steady, but within that there have been changes because of the expansion, for instance, of special education staff in order to try to maintain as many students in district as possible. There have been the implementation of the SILs over the last few years. Classroom teachers have declined based on enrollment. So there have been ups and downs in the different categories and some additions. So I just think it's kind of important to try to understand those changes over time. That just 10 years ago, our enrollment was whatever. And look, it's 10 years later, we have fewer kids, but our FTE looks about the same. So that's kind of a legitimate concern. But then when you think, oh, yes, that was in the day before we had security officers, or that was in the day before we had more in-house programming for special needs, or that those were the days before we had the SILs. So I just think we need to kind of try to capture that. And I think Phil said there are slides or charts that might be able to kind of put that picture together as well. So Erica, that would be my only suggestion to augment what you just said. And then, we have 5 minutes left. The question came up early and will probably continue to come up early, is okay, you have a smaller student body and you still have a lot of what seems to, whatever the writer might be thinking about, a lot of administrators. So the question is kind of like, do we have the right number of administrators? How do we look at that? And, how do we deal with that? So if we can't do it right now, that's okay. But I do think that's kind of an annual question in every single district, just because I've had that experience. It's always, you must have, administrators that, you don't need because your enrollment just went down. So I understand the question, and I'm looking for, let's provide a robust answer.
Yes,
If not today, then shortly down the road.
Yes, I think some of those questions are included in our next section, which is the staffing. And Deb, I think you and other board members had submitted questions around, the number of administrators and, the implications for reducing that and what that means. So we can certainly explore those responses further at the next meeting.
Okay, that's perfect. All right, so then we have gone through the questions scheduled for today. Thank you again, Erica, and all the principals and the entire staff. This takes a tremendous amount of work to compile and organize and make it comprehensible to people outside of the field without the technical knowledge, and stay on topic, and but yet, answer completely as well. So thank you all very much. And I honestly forget when our next meeting is, but I'm sure Jody will let us know. And so do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, everybody wants to adjourn. All right, all in favor? All right, thank you all.